Well, thank you a lot for your talk tonight. We collected several questions from the audience, and we want to ask you the questions now. I'm going to read the first one, and then Nikolai is going to go on. The example of your dream of a flat hierarchy obviously is convincing, but how can we manage to break the power of global capital to realize it on a transnational scale?
Do you remember Occupy Wall Street? It was fun, but it was pathetic. Or the Indignados in Madrid and Barcelona, or us in Greece, in Syntagma Square. We had fun. Night after night after night, we protested. We had assemblies. Everybody spoke. It was, reminded me of Oscar Wilde saying socialism would never happen because the discussions take too long. Right? But it was completely ineffective. People got tired, we went home, and the bankers were bailed out anyway, so nothing changed. Now, I loathe violence. I don't like revolutions, because I just get scared of what will happen. I mean, I've been on streets where the demonstrations were getting ugly, and I didn't like it. Maybe I'm a coward, right? But if you look at all the revolutions that have taken place, they've eaten the children up and produced a lot of despotism, tyranny. But imagine a completely different digital campaign. Imagine that somebody, maybe you, maybe us, Diem, organized a day of inaction vis-à-vis Amazon, that we organized a global strike by consumers. On Tuesday, such and such, yeah? We're not going to visit the Amazon website, none of us, just one day. Do you know what this is going to do to Amazon? And imagine we had rolling such strikes. And imagine if some of the employees of Facebook or Amazon joined us, because they are very badly exploited, most of them, very few of them get decent wages. And imagine that they faced a double strike by consumers. No, we'd have to do it. It wouldn't really hurt us. We just wouldn't buy anything from Amazon for a day or two, or a week. I can live without buying anything from Amazon for a week, okay? Imagine a campaign that also involved financial engineering. I believe in financial engineering. So, when they privatized, the neoliberal drive towards privatizing water, electricity, everything, you know that the worst aspect of it was that they securitized the future income stream of these companies. So all the electricity bills that you're going to pay until you die have already been purchased in the form of CDOs by some company somewhere, right? So the company that bought the public utility got Goldman Sachs to create a contract where what they did was they said, okay, we project that over the next 30 years, these are going to be the revenues of the company from the electricity bills. So you take this huge amount, you cut it up in small, tiny pieces. You do the same thing with returns from railways, from water, from whatever. And then you create little packages, the CDOs, that comprise different parts of these chunks of different future income streams, okay? And those CDOs sell like hotcakes. And the companies that buy them for two reasons. Firstly, to receive the revenues that those chunks of property rights generate within, and also because they think that if the value of the CDO goes up, they can sell it and make some surplus value. Imagine if we had smart financial engineers who knew what was inside each one of those CDOs and said, okay, people of Tübingen, okay, if you delay paying your bills for a month, okay, it's not going to be a huge penalty that you suffer. We can crowdfund and give you the money for the payment. But today it will be Tübingen, tomorrow it will be Freiburg, day after it will be Leipzig, Paris, and so on. Together with, in other words, to have a grid of strikes. You can bring down the whole financial system. Just bring it down completely. So, we have a lot of power The question is, what are we asking for? I think we should ask for rewriting corporate law and saying that you cannot buy shares anymore. You have to give them equally to all your employees. Now, I know that sounds extreme, but it's an idea. And my job is to implant dangerous ideas into the mind of the young.
So the second question is very concise, and it brings us back to the core of capitalism. Someone asked, what is constitutive for capitalism for you, if markets are not?
Oh, it's private ownership of tradable shares. It's really very simple. The fact that most people who work for a company do not own any part of the company, and most people who actually own the company do not work for the company. That separation is the height of irrationality. It begets the cruelty that we had from the British the East India Company to what's going on today. Imagine that you broke down that separation for Facebook, for Google, for JP Morgan. Suddenly you have a complete transformation. You don't do away with markets, but you do away with capitalism.
Okay, now we will come to the questions about pluralism in economics. And the first question that somebody asked is, for you, what is pluralism in economics and how can it be achieved?
I've answered that. Where were you? For me, pluralism in economics is... But I'll answer it once more, because, you know, we need repetitio est mater studiorum. Two things. First, we need to teach with equal passion all different perspectives, especially the ones we disagree with. Especially the ones we disagree with. We have to give them the best chance when we present them to students. Secondly, we have to do it in parallel with a history of capitalism that explains where those ideas came from. Why was it, for instance, that David Ricardo, who loved Adam Smith and who loved capitalism, suddenly went crazy in the early part of the 19th century? The reason is the Napoleonic Wars that made a lot of money for landowners in Britain as a result of the eradication of international trade, the lack of imports. And after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, they wanted to stop imports so that they could keep their rents. And Ricardo went crazy, and he came up with the concept of rent, and he differentiated rent from profit. This is what we teach our students. But unless you teach them this from a historical perspective, in the context of the Napoleonic Wars, it will go in one ear and exit from the other ear.
All right. I like to believe that there's economics students out there who feels a little bit lost after this lecture, and who actually asked that with a lot of theories around, but not being true, but still being taught, with what mindset should I approach them while studying economics so I won't get lost in them? And maybe a follow-up practical question, is there an economic textbook that you could or would recommend to a current student of economics?
Okay. First question. You should approach every model, every theory with enthusiasm, because they are all beautiful, independently of whether they're useful, toxic, whatever. They're all beautiful, okay? And so, you know, you just have some fun while you approach them and you study them. There are two ways in which you should be critical of every theory. Two ways. They're very different and equally important. The first one is internal criticism. That is, say, okay, so what are your assumptions? Give me your assumptions. Okay, I'll take them for granted. I won't challenge them. Now let's see whether your conclusions are logically the result of a process beginning with your assumptions, because a lot are not. There is a lot of sleight of hand in economics. Many economists, I'm afraid, especially the second-rate ones, not the first-rate ones. The second-rate ones, they're a bit like, cardinals, who are, more papist than the Pope, right? And they cut corners. And you can easily expose them, and you say, look, what you just said does not follow from your own assumptions. I'm not going to criticize your assumptions. That's really very important. An aside regarding this, one of the greats of economics, of neoclassical economics, is, of course, Kenneth Arrow. You've heard of Arrow-Debré theorems. If you've studied economics, Arrow's impossibility theorem. Kenneth Arrow was one of the first to win the fake Nobel Prize in economics, the Nobel Prize in economics, let's call it. An unbelievable mind, an unbelievable mind. I remember he taught me a huge lesson. It was 1991. I was visiting New York, and he was already an old man, and he was giving a talk at NYU. I'm not exactly, NYU, Columbia, I'm not exactly sure. Small seminar room, about 15, 20 professors. I was the youngest in there at the time. And so, he fills all the boards full of equations. One of the professors, it was an academic seminar, says, Professor Arrow, I think that 3.1, and especially the lemma that corresponds to that, probably indicates that a lump sum tax would not be as efficient as a pro rata tax. And Arrow looks at him and says, my dear chap, you are confusing that which is interesting with that which is useful. This is interesting. It is not useful. If you try to apply it to tax policy, you'll be dangerous. Okay? So that's something you can do. It's fun doing it. The second kind of criticism is external criticism. To say, hang on a second, what's this assumption of yours here? You're assuming that people maximize something called utility. Let's look at it philosophically. Does it correspond to introspection? Is this what I do in life? This is a more philosophical critique. Okay? Every theory has its assumptions. All of them are questionable. So, criticize the way in which assumptions are used in order to derive theorems, and then criticize the assumptions. That's the answer to the first question. As for textbooks, look, will it sound awful if I tell you that at some point I had to write a textbook because I couldn't answer that question? There.
Okay, so we have one more question for you. What can economics contribute in the discourse of climate change and challenges the society is facing through it?
Thank you. Did you notice that the US Treasury Secretary, a week ago, 10 days ago at Davos, tried to denigrate Greta by saying, go to college and study economics and then come back and explain it to us. I tweeted, unfortunately, he has a point, not for the reason that he says, but because if Greta goes to college to study economics, her soul will most probably be crushed. And that's a very efficient way of getting rid of her. And immediately, I got a torrent of abuse from colleagues, economists, understandably, who said, come on, Yanis, you know very well that economics, what we teach our students, contains a lot of concepts that are extremely useful for understanding climate change, market failure, and so on, which is completely true. The concept of externality, adverse selection, informational asymmetries. You can use all those concepts to explain why markets fail and why, in the case of climate change, they fail so spectacularly that they will destroy human life on this planet. So there is no doubt. But the point I was making was that for Greta, if she were to study economics, to get to those concepts, she would first have to go through the normal standard model in which there are no externalities, you have perfect competition, everything works angelically, and then externalities are presented as an exception, an externality, something external to the mainstream, to what really is going on in the marketplace, okay? But it's not just that, because somebody could then say, okay, so why don't we just reverse the order of teaching? We can start with the externality and then teach competitive markets, of, efficient competitive markets. Well, you can't do that, because the moment you introduce externalities, you can't solve the mathematics. You have no demand curves. You have no supply curves, or the demand curves you have are very funny looking, like, the market for lemons, George Akerlof's model. And it really, you can't build the whole panoply of economics textbooks on the basis of externalities. So there is an inherent bias in mainstream economics against treating climate change as the real game in town, with fictitious markets that work perfectly in some realm of our collective imagination. That's it.
Well, thank you very much. In fact, we're very happy that someone in the audience asked that question, because as it happens, if you're interested in the topic of ecological economics or economics and sustainability, we're organizing a lecture series, the same that has been organized for this semester, but with the topic of ecological economics, economics and sustainability, starting in April at this university, and we would love to see some faces again next semester for this lecture, for that lecture series.
And now we want to thank Professor Yannis Varoufakis for his talk and his presence here tonight. And we want to thank the wonderful audience here and in the other lecture halls, and also all our helpers that were here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.